everyone. This is Dee Marley with the History Bards podcast, and we invite you today to join us as we interview Christa Nonnemaker. And Christa is a history and social science secondary level teacher for many years now, and she holds a BA in history from UCLA and an MA in American history from Stanford University. In addition to her role as a secondary school teacher, Christa designs social studies curriculums. Wow. She has presented at conferences such as the National Council for the Social Studies Annual Conference and the National Women's Studies Association Conference. Christa has also served as an AP reader for AP United States History and AP World History for the College Board. Hearts at War, her first novel, is the result of Christa's pursuit to shed light on an unknown and significant issue in American history. So that kind of leads us right into, since we've given a little introduction to our listeners, about how you got into and what is this significant issue in American history that you so wanted to write about.
I wanted to share more about the Japanese American experience, and that is because I've always had a long-term interest in World War II. So in fact, my master's thesis was on a topic in World War II, which was federal child care centers, which were available during World War II. So that also sort of speaks to the fact that I try and find these little pieces about history that maybe are not well known. But the federal child care centers, by the way, went by the wayside until you could say the Head Start program sort of came back. But that's a different issue. The issue I was really focusing on when I was researching this book was about the Japanese American internment and how little I feel that history has shared about that experience. Because, like Dee, you've said, I am a teacher, and the textbooks for high school level, at least, pretty much talk about the fact that Japanese Americans from the West Coast were interned in these internment centers on the West Coast, and that the majority of Japanese Americans were living in California, Oregon, and Washington. And so if they lived there, they were moved into 10 different centers throughout the Western United States, or the 2 places in Arkansas. Strangely, that was sort of another place. But if Japanese Americans were living in Chicago or New York or Atlanta or anything like that, they were not interned. They were not considered threats. So that is a piece of information that a lot of people don't know about. Another piece of information is that the Japanese Americans were able to leave the internment camps and go to the Midwest or the East Coast, and many did. And the last piece of information, the one that I found so surprising I decided to write about, was that Japanese American young men who were, college age generally, if they spoke Japanese at all, and many did, because they went to Japanese language schools when they were growing up. That's something their parents wanted to continue, that they were selected for a special military unit called the Military Intelligence Service, and they served in the Pacific Theater of War as translators and interpreters and interrogators. Many have heard about the 442nd, which was a combat unit which went over to Europe, and they were highly decorated, the most highly decorated unit in the European theater. But hardly anybody knew about these intelligence intelligence soldiers. None of them, well, one became an officer, the rest did not. However, that piece of information was kept hidden. The Army did not share that information. It was kept hidden until the 1970s, purposely. So I wanted to share that piece of information. Oh, and of course, because this is a historical romance, women who served in the military, the women Army Corps members, most of them served stateside. A few went to Europe, a few battalions and units, and a very small group went to the Pacific Theater and served in New Guinea and Australia, and then in the Philippines. And so I wanted to put those stories together of the women's experience. And by the way, they were Caucasian white women who were served in the Pacific, although there were colored units of the WAC as well. That's a lot, but that's really what the small slice of history that I wanted to share with.
And I think that's really fascinating. It reminds me of there was a particular movie, wasn't there, a while back? It was a pretty famous movie, and I cannot for the life of me remember the name of the movie, but it dealt with that subject as well, and I can't remember what it is. I'll have to look it up and see if I can
Please
remember.
do. I would love
Yeah.
to know about it. I feel like I've looked through and combed through so much and know most of the World War II movies.
Uh-huh.
So if was it about the women Army Corps or was it about the
No,
Nisei?
it was actually a little bit of a romance between someone that was in an internment camp. I don't know. I have to. Whenever you were talking about it, it kind of brought up in my mind, and
Interesting.
I'm going to have to look it up now because now it's going to bug me until I know, until
Yeah.
I remember
And
what
I
that
want to know
was.
too. So definitely
Okay.
let me know.
I will definitely let you know. So that's really, really fascinating, all of this history that you have about it. So can you tell us a little bit more about your book and the premise, the story behind it?
Sure. So one of the reasons, so I wanted to, rather than write a history book about it or nonfiction
Mhm.
book, I wanted to set it in, I love historical romance. So that's
Yeah.
the genre that I wanted to write.
Yeah.
So I also knew because the Nisei, the second generation Japanese Americans, were living in California, Oregon, and Washington. And I wanted to set it in Southern California because I knew a lot about what life was like in California in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s in the war, during the war, because my mother grew up in Southern California.
Right.
And so she used to tell me stories all the time about what life was like during World War II. She was a young girl at the time. She was 6 when Pearl Harbor was bombed,
Wow.
but she has an excellent memory. And so she would tell me about all these interesting things about life in California in the 20s because her family had arrived in the early 1900s in
Mhm.
California. So they had grown up in the 20s, and her mother had grown up and come of age in the 20s. And so I had a lot of background information. Then I added more research to that to
Right.
verify and corroborate all the stories that she told me. So I integrated the research, I integrated my mother's stories, and I knew that there were Japanese American farmers in the San Fernando Valley, which is where the book starts. And so that's where my mother also grew up
Mhm.
and where her mother had lived as well, which is just outside of LA. It's a suburb of Los Angeles.
Mhm.
So I wanted to integrate that into the story. And then, so that's how it began.
Okay.
Oh,
And
wait, I'm
so,
sorry.
no,
Did
no,
you
no.
also want me to tell you more about
Yes, we
how the
would love.
story went on? Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So here's,
Love to
okay.
know.
So these two individuals, Betty and Tosh, the main characters, Betty is a the daughter of a lawyer, but they happen to own a somewhat large parcel of land where they have an orchard, and that was typical of the area to have groves
Yeah.
and orchards in the San Fernando Valley. And then
Right.
the farming family next to them, Tasha's family, they also had a small farm that they rented because Japanese Americans were not allowed to own land
Right.
under the California Alien Land Law, so which was passed in 1913. That's my history teacher speaking. Anyway, so anyway, they meet in high school, and well, they actually meet when they're children, but their love, attraction, if you will,
Yeah.
sort of begins in high school, and it's a moment of tension there because that's not considered acceptable by the
Right. Of
cultural
course.
norms of the time, right?
Yeah.
But it's not that they didn't that you didn't have interracial dating at times. They did, but families really didn't like it. Society, the general larger societies didn't like seeing this integration much.
Mhm.
Anyway, moving on. So the war breaks out, and Tosh is at UCLA, and Betty goes to Berkeley, and they sort of they'll run into each other in college, but once the Japanese Americans are forced into the internment camps, they sort of lose touch. And in the internment camps, this is one of the pieces where I really wanted to shed really some interesting light on things. In the camps, and Tosh is sent to Manzanar, which was very typical of Southern California Japanese Americans to first be sent to the Santa Anita Assembly Center and then go to Manzanar, which is
Mhm.
in the central part of California. Anyway, there's a big riot
Oh,
in the camp. And that was actually something that happened throughout the camps, the internment camps, that there were riots for
wow.
all sorts of reasons, poor food, not enough decent housing or medical care, bad education, all sorts of reasons.
Mhm.
Anyway, but the army was recruiting at that time. So Tosh decides to join the military, and he sends a letter to Betty. Betty continues on with college and eventually graduates just in time to when it opens up to women in the Army Corps. So she will join that. And it's just purely coincidence that they will eventually meet in Australia again.
Wow.
So there's this, after their training, they both end up in Australia, and they have this wonderful whirlwind romance, and they really fall in love and succumb to their feelings, and they think that they can, make it, but then they're separated again. Mm-hmm. She's sent off to New Guinea. He's sent off in a part of the island hopping campaign as the army heads towards Japan. And when Tosh reaches the Philippines, his best friend, Frank, is killed by friendly fire, as it were. And what's sort of unfortunate about that is that it's based on a true story. Oh. In any event, his father also will die in Manzanar, and he's so torn by this that he leaves the military and tells Betty that everything's done. They haven't seen each other for, a year or so. And so she's bereft. She continues on to the Philippines, can't really leave the wax at this point, and she meets somebody else and marries him. Oh. And then she moves to the East Coast. I'm telling the story.
Yeah, don't give away any spoilers.
Okay, so then I'll leave it at that. But that's okay. Part of the book, that there's this romance, and they have to grapple with all the issues of society. Are they going to be accepted? Are they allowed to actually continue and have a relationship that will be successful? And how is war treating women? How is war treating Japanese Americans? All those issues are in the book. That was the whole point of the book.
Yeah. And how do you feel like that resonates with today? Because it seems to be like in historical fiction, there's a huge following for World War II stories.
Huge.
And so how do you feel like that why do you think that resonates so much today?
I think people are looking first at nostalgia, but also at people's, I think the thing that is fascinating about history, I think this is something that many find fascinating, is that the people rise to the occasion and are able to overcome almost unimaginable conditions. So when you think about, and so that concerns resistance, affairs of the heart, challenges, whether it's code breaking, whatever. So World War II created a huge challenge to the world. Yeah. And there were so many different problems that were broken out. Basically, they were brought to the forefront. So women had a chance to participate in life in ways that they never had before. Right. Other people of color and different minority groups also had these opportunities that were fascinating. And women and men were able to resist against horrific and brutal dictatorships. Yeah. So a lot of the World War II fiction that's so popular is based on resistance in Europe. People just love reading those stories. But also popular stories tend to be about women's groups and how they were able to do what they were able to in the home front, like who knows, whatever it is, nursing stations, or the women who served in the military in Great Britain and in the United States, the women who flew, the WASPs, the Waves who served in the Navy. All of those things really, I think, make us realize that you can go out of your comfort zone and have new experiences and become a more confident person, and that groups can achieve great things as well. Mm-hmm. So it lends a glimmer of hope and positivity. Yes. Sometimes when life is pretty difficult.
Yeah, and to me, that's a lot of what historical fiction does. And one of the reasons why I love the genre, because it seems to resonate, because it connects people through history and the issues that everybody is going through throughout time, and the survival of people, and the resilience, like you said, has been amazing. It really has. So I think it's like you said, that it really resonates with people today. Because we just went through COVID, and now look, we're all surviving.
Yes. COVID was sort of our had to face our own demons, if you will.
That's
Right?
for
We
sure.
we we learned a lot about ourselves. That's what war
Yes.
does too. You learn a lot. Like if you're an introvert or if you're an extrovert, boy, you had a tough time. But
Uh-huh.
people manage. Same thing. If introverts, they realize, oh, wow, this isn't so bad. Um,
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So tell us are you working on anything new?
if I'm thinking, I'm churning things are in my head, and I am thinking about time travel.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
time
please.
travel might be fun. So that might be interesting. Another era that I really love is actually two eras, sort of the same theme. Women's rights of the 1840s,
Mhm.
Seneca Falls, and all the people involved, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton,
Yeah.
and people like that. And then, or the suffrage movement, although that's big, right? That's post-Civil War up till
Yeah.
1920, and there's all sorts of characters. There's Carrie Chapman Catt,
Uh-huh.
of course, Susan B. Anthony, um, Alice Paul, Anna Howard Shaw. So those are possibles as well.
Yeah, I mean that's exciting, and that seems to be to combine those two things. That would be very interesting to see how you might do that.
Yeah, maybe. Although, World War II, I think is always my number
Yeah.
one go-to one. So we'll see. I integrated Betty's experience in the Women Army Corps, and that's interesting to me. But the women who served in the WASPs, the Women Air Service Pilot Program, and the waves to me were also that was fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility as well.
Which is a pretty good setup there because somebody flying, they might go through time somehow.
I know that's exactly what I was thinking. And of course, I don't know where you're based, but anyway, the WASP headquarters were at Love Field in Texas.
Okay, I'm right below Atlanta.
Okay. I figured you were from the South.
Yes,
I wasn't sure where.
everybody says that because they can always tell when I open my mouth.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, yeah, and Betty went to training camp in Fort Oglethorpe
Okay.
in, yeah, Georgia, northern Georgia.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. Well, that sounds really great. Well, we'd be really excited for your next release. And
Thank you.
yeah, so with Hearts at War, do you have anything like any events coming up with it, or anything that anybody would need to know about so that they might come by and see you, get a signed copy?
Oh, I had some recently. And I have not scheduled anything further,
Okay.
but I'm sure I can share it with you if I do.
Yes,
Um,
please.
yeah, so but it's interesting. I do like to travel, and as I travel around, I think, oh, maybe I could write about this and write about that. So we'll see. Maybe my thoughts will change on things.
Yeah, definitely. So let me ask you one last question about how do you feel about marketing? A lot of authors really want to know, how to get your book out. Do you have any suggestions or advice for new authors or authors, or seasoned authors out there about marketing?
As a new author myself, I'm still wondering about various
Yeah.
things, but I have noticed sometimes that when I'll mention my book maybe in Facebook groups. There, many of them say, of course, no self-promotion and no
Right.
spam and this kind of thing, but there are various Facebook groups that exist for authors
Yeah.
and readers. And so sometimes if they are asking for, new things that you've done or something you want to share, that's often very effective. You just throw
Yes.
your book title out there and people find it. But as a history teacher, I've also um, put my book into various, shall I say, channels where history teachers go to
Oh,
find resources. And
that's
that has been
excellent.
sort of interesting and
That's
somewhat
excellent.
not completely effective. There's a lot of different books out there, and my book is one of many, many books about World War II. So,
Mhm.
it's not the easiest subgenre to be in, shall we say. But and I will say this too. I have been wanting to write a book about World War II for 10 years, so I feel like I was way ahead of the curve. I was just behind in getting it written and
Oh,
published.
yeah. Yeah. It seems like whenever you have that kind of interest, everybody else has it at the same time.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Christa. We really enjoyed you being on the show today, and we will definitely put your website. Can you tell everybody what your website is so that they can go and find out more?
At the moment, it's called historyprisms.com, and it is still under construction, but it is going to be there soon. So that's where you can find more information about the book and more
Okay.
in terms of what I do for history and curriculum development, things like that.
Okay, well, we'll be sure and have that posted on the screen. And then whenever it comes up, we'll be sure and let everybody know that it's ready to go, and then they can go check out you and your books and learn more about and anticipate anything new coming from you.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for everybody who listened today. And thank you, Christa, for being on the show today. For everybody listening, continue to listen and keep up to date for the new episodes that are coming out this week. And we got a special one coming out next week for with Stephen Martin. He is the Rare Book Guy, and he sells vintage historical books. Some of the ones that I've seen personally that he has an old signed copy that was signed by Bram Stoker, and he has
Wow.
Collections from Jane Austen, the Brontes. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and we'll have that on the show next week. So please stay tuned for that. To all the listeners, thank you again for listening. And to Christa, thank you for being here. And
Thank you so
please
much
keep
again.
listening.